Okay, so we've got quite a few people coming through now, so I think we're best off to get started. Hi guys, welcome. I can ask my lovely panelists to turn the microphone on and get the camera on, that'd be great, thank you. Okay, so I think let's just get started. So welcome to online learning and digital strategy, preparing for the future. We've got lots to cover today. So yeah, just quickly, if anybody has any questions at all throughout, please just pop it in the chat box and I will bring them up at appropriate time, whether that's while we're discussing a certain topic or at the end. We can just play by ear. So for those of you who don't know much about Impero, we've been around for over 20 years now, and we've been creating technology solutions for education, but also most recently corporate organisations. Essentially, we want to empower every individual to reach their full potential. And our vision for the future is to create an environment where we can all be collectively safe and productive online. We have recently done a survey of 500 primary and secondary school teachers, and we found some really interesting findings, which is why we're hosting this roundtable. One of which was that 80% of teachers agreed that when operated correctly and safely, the use of internet connected devices in the classroom improves student engagement and performance. So there are some incredible benefits to learning online, but there are also some dangers, which is why we've brought in our incredible panelists to discuss these. And we have Impero Classroom is our cloud classroom management solution that we have recently released in spring. So that gives you the ability to view all student devices in real time, and you have the ability to either send them specific URLs that you want to keep them onto, you can block certain URLs, you can push them a message. There's just a lot of functionality there that will allow you to make the most of learning time and also just look after your learners a little bit more. So yeah, without further ado, if I can pass on to Charlotte to introduce yourself, then we can go around the room.
Thank you, Lulu, and nice to see a few attendees, a few names that I recognise. I was just thinking that at the start of this, maybe we need to all have a guess at how many more ministers will resign during our session. So if anyone wants to, kind of estimate it in the chat, how many more we're going to lose in the next hour, I think we could have a fun poll at the end. My name's Charlotte Aynsley. I'm a freelance thank you, Martha. Online safety consultant. I've worked with Impero for a number of years, helping them to develop their approach to digital safeguarding in schools, and very much looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have today. Thank you, Lulu.
So if I can get Caroline, if you can introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, thank you for having me on. My name's Caroline Allams and I am co-founder at Natterhub, former teacher and passionate about this space. So really, again, looking forward to this conversation. Natterhub is a safe gated platform that teaches children the soft skills that underpin positive digital citizenship. It's a primary school tool, really as an early intervention before children venture unaided into the digital landscape.
Fantastic, thank you. And last but not least, Martha.
Hi, I'm Martha. I'm director of the Anti-Bullying Alliance. We're a coalition of about 180 organisations who all work together to unite against bullying. We've got lots of free online training on our website and things like that. And we also coordinate Anti-Bullying Week each year. And we're really pleased that Impero are going to partner with us for Anti-Bullying Week this year too.
Yeah, really looking forward to that week and exciting what projects we can do. So yeah, just a bit of housekeeping before we get going. I don't know if the attendees actually have the mic function. I think you automatically are not allowed to put your mic on, but just in case it comes on, if you can just keep it off, just so we can keep background noise down as much as possible. Yeah, and as I said, questions in the question box and we will get to them when it's best. Okay, brilliant. So one of our findings from our 500 primary and secondary school teachers was that 70% agreed that it was becoming more difficult to monitor and control students' use of internet connected devices at school. So Charlotte, why do you think it's becoming more difficult to monitor and control students' use of internet connected devices at school?
Thank you, Lulu. I must admit, I find it slightly surprising, this statistic, just because I know that the technology that you've just described is much better and much more granular now, so that you can have the monitoring on across different devices, and it can be quite granular according to year groups and specific URLs, websites, etc. So I do find it slightly surprising. However, I think the reason why it's probably more challenging is because kids and students are more used to being online now, because they've been at home for on and off 2 years. They've been learning, they've spent a lot more time on devices online than they would have done normally. So I think probably children's expectations have ramped up in terms of what they want to access and when. And it's always been an ongoing challenge for schools to allow students to access learning resources in the classroom when they need to, and when they want to show things like, I mean, I can remember the days when schools couldn't even show YouTube videos, to break time and lunchtime, where children potentially want to go on their devices and want to access things, but schools don't want them to go onto social media, etc. I think it's also a big challenge for parents as well, because often, particularly when children go to secondary school, they want their children to have their phones so that they know where they are, so that they can call them after school. So I think there's a multitude of issues. I think the other thing as well is that 4G, 5G is much more explicit now. So even if you can't necessarily, if they do have their device, you can't force them to use the school's network, which I think is incredibly challenging as well. And also a lot of, in the classroom, a lot of children are bringing in their own devices. So a lot of schools have adopted a kind of BYOD policy where children are bringing in their own devices. So to implement a system where you've got monitoring and filtering across a range of devices, it is quite challenging.
Yeah, thank you for that, Charlotte. So moving on to what teachers and schools can do to better deal with this kind of challenge. And in terms of like preparing and educating students on best practice when using internet connected devices, Caroline, what do you think we could do?
Well, obviously, 100% agree with Charlotte around, you know, being quite surprised, and also, you know, to hear more about the technical solutions for monitoring and controlling students' use. But I think, how can teachers and schools prepare children to be ready for that stage of their learning, their development? I think it has to start way earlier in the education journey. We really encourage primary schools to begin this right at the beginning of the primary school journey, to raise the profile and the importance of digital citizenship. Because if we're needing to monitor and control students' use, we're talking about behaviour. And I think so often online safety and the issues around online safety tend to be surround the knowledge about online safety, understanding different platforms, understanding games and settings. And actually the issues that we see so frequently in schools are around the behavior aspect. And I think a couple of things that we really need to do: one, as I said, raise the profile of online safety and moreover digital citizenship, because that's wider reaching and has a greater chance of, you know, impacting the situation for the better. The problem that teachers have, I think, is that even though there are aspects of, you know, teaching online safety and digital citizenship within the curriculum, it's not enough. So the biggest blocker, I think, for teachers in preparing and educating students around using the internet wisely, safely, savvily, creatively, is that they do not have enough time available to them to teach the soft skills around using internet connected devices. And I think it's a massive problem, because the issues that we see around the problems and online vulnerability and the misuse of devices, certainly in the school setting, further along their education journey, is around their behaviour, and we just need to remember that the children outside of school are spending such a large amount of their time on internet connected devices. And so we need to reflect this in the amount of time that we spend educating and preparing them for that digital landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've mentioned the frustrations on having enough time to educate the students, and we actually found quite 58% of teachers in our survey actually wanted to ban student devices entirely from school grounds. So, Caroline, like, how would banning internet connected devices and phones and technology, how would it impact learning?
I really think that children learn best through doing, and I'm sure many educators would agree. And I think that, you know, recent research shows that in order to build digital resilience, digital awareness, digital empathy, promote the importance of kindness, and really under that whole umbrella of digital citizenship, children have to be to some extent in a risk-taking situation, so that metacognitively they need to know whether they're making correct or incorrect choices. And I know that for teachers, obviously with the statistics that you're showing us, this is too risky a scenario. But I think banning personal devices, or even banning internet connected devices, is not a solution either, because there's a problem that needs to be resolved. And technology, edtech always is used best when it's the right tool for the right job. And I think it's also about realizing, you know, when using edtech, when using technology in the classroom is the right choice. And I think it's important that we understand, you know, the use of technology, and have a lot of conversations around when it is and isn't appropriate, when it's the best use of technology for that learning. Because I think sometimes, you know, in the classroom, there's perhaps not a need to use internet connected devices, but I think banning them is not dealing with the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've heard a lot of conversations with some of our product team who have said that actually overblocking can be as dangerous as you know, leaving everything open. So I can definitely understand that point. So Martha, if I come to you, I know Caroline, you have touched on your opinion on whether we should ban personal devices from school grounds, but Martha, what is your opinion on that?
Thanks. Yeah, I definitely agree with what Caroline said. I hope we're not going to spend the whole time agreeing with each other. I think we possibly might. But yeah, I absolutely agree. I agree with that. I think it's hard to hold back the tide, but I also think it's not, as Caroline and Charlotte said, it's not actually necessarily beneficial to be stopping people with technology. We did some research about how disabled children use the internet, and found that actually they were often discouraged from doing things that other children were doing, and that was actually really detrimental to their life chances, you know, not going on social media because people were worried about how do we keep them safe, and actually that was really detrimental to their well-being and their chances in life. So I think much better ways of dealing with it would be to set very clear boundaries, and to really reinforce that and get children's involvement and parents' involvement in creating those boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. And Charlotte, would you agree with both points there?
Yes, like Martha says, are we at risk of agreeing with each other too much? But I think it feels sort of slightly disappointing that we're still even having this conversation about whether or not we should allow internet connected devices in schools. I think there is an issue about classroom management. I think that is a very real life issue. And if you're trying to manage the behaviour of 30 odd children in a classroom, whether they're primary or secondary, that can be incredibly difficult, and we wouldn't want to overcomplicate that. But I think the appropriate use of technology is really important. We used to have a mantra which was, does it make it easier, better, or different? Is it adding to the experience? Is it making your life easier because you can show a science experiment using something, and then you can get all the kids to get their devices out to kind of input data, for example? There's some brilliant examples of where technology really adds to the learning and really brings colour and life to learning. And I think it's quite, it's too blunt an instrument to say that that all schools should not allow them. I think having the boundaries, reinforcing the policies, reinforcing the agreements that you have in place in school is really important. But banning or blocking it completely is, as we've all talked about, is quite detrimental, actually.
Yeah, I mean, you spoke about how technology can actually bring life to learning. What are the other kind of benefits that you see from using technology in the classroom, Charlotte?
I mean, I think it really can bring things to life. It can allow, I mean, if you think about physical activity as well, you know, subjects like PE, you can film a child under certain parameters, under certain safeguards, performing some kind of sport, and they can look at that video and they can reflect on their performance. They can think about how to further refine and develop their performance. The same with things like drama. So I think there are huge benefits, but it's about drawing out those benefits and making sure that everybody understands why you're doing it, and then making sure that you have the kind of safeguards in place to both protect the children and also protect staff as well. I don't think we should be using tech willy-nilly or for the, you know, for no particular reason, but I do think it does have a place. And I think Caroline's absolutely right in that we should be thinking about the proportionate amount of time spent in teaching children and young people how to be good digital citizens compared to the amount of time that they're spending online, because it's an exorbitant amount. It's an exorbitant amount that we're all spending online, not just children.
Absolutely. And Martha, you mentioned earlier your findings of children with disabilities using technology. And would you actually say that a benefit of using technology in the classroom is that it's actually very inclusive and it can sort of cross that boundary?
Yeah, absolutely. There's new ways that children can get involved that may have found it quite difficult before to get involved. And we've got a young people group which we're speaking to, and we just did a session with them earlier today. And what we find is that they actually don't want to speak to us on Zoom anymore. They're absolutely sick of it. So instead they were just writing in the chat, and we were umming and ahhing about whether that was the right thing to do or not. And we thought, well, we really want to talk to them. But actually what we decided was actually that's fine. If that's how they want to get things out, that's all right. And so there's lots of, it's kind of, there's so many creative ways that they can get involved. But what I think the biggest thing is asking them things that they're interested in. So whether it be Roblox, or, you know, unfortunately, whether it might be sometimes things that you wouldn't necessarily want it to be, like the latest episode of Love Island for older children, you know, but if it's what they're doing and what they're watching, it gets them engaged. So let them bring that to you, ask them what they've been doing online and start a conversation from there, because it sort of captures their imagination often. Yeah.
That's really interesting to actually open up the sort of technology in the classroom to the students. Well, what do you want to see? Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. So if we move on to our next finding, we found something that was actually quite frightening, that over 60% of teachers agreed that the internet connected devices enable abuse of both teachers and students. And it was happening more frequently the more technology that was brought into the classroom. So Martha, if I come again to you, what are some of the signs to look out for when we are identifying individuals who are the target of abuse?
I think a lot of the time it's very similar to other types of abuse that isn't online. But some of the things that you should look out for is spending either lots more time than usual online or hardly any time online. So being really anxious if they're secretive about what they're doing online, or being really far away from their tech and not wanting to get anywhere near tech. Also, you know, thinking about new phone numbers all of a sudden, or new email addresses, different things that they're suddenly interested in. But it's often very similar to signs of other abuse, changes in habits, suddenly seeming unhappy. What's also important to remember is, particularly when you're thinking about bullying, is that it's actually quite rare for children's reactions to experiencing bullying and abuse, whether it be online or face-to-face, is they don't always look sad. They may act out. So it's actually quite, because often it will make children much more likely to be targets if they walk around looking sad. So sometimes they will be angry, and so the reactions aren't always going to be the ones that you expect, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's really interesting. Thank you. So when it comes to how schools deal with incidents of online or offline bullying, what is your kind of suggestion? What's your approach when it comes to that, Martha?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say is think about your safeguarding policy. If the child's in immediate risk of danger, speak to calling 999 or looking at your safeguarding process. LSPCC's helpline is brilliant. If you can kind of give them a call and see if there's anything that you're worried about, or the Safe Internet Centre helpline as well is great. If we're thinking about sort of abuse and child abuse images, for example, it is against the law to share or reproduce those images. But the biggest thing to do is to not comment, take screen grabs or anything. Just stop and report it to the website that you're on, if it's on a social media site, and then report it through your safeguarding policy immediately. Also, the Internet Watch Foundation is great for taking down content, and the Professional Online Safety Helpline can give you advice. But when you're speaking to that child directly, and you're talking about the experiences that they've had, it's really important to stay as calm as possible. Listen really carefully to what they're saying, and take note of anything that they're telling you about abuse that they may have seen, and letting them know that it's the right thing that they've done to come and talk to you, and that you're going to work things out together. It's really common that children will not come and tell you about abuse that they're experiencing online, because they're either worried about what you're going to do, but often they're worried about how you're going to react to the things that they did back. So it's quite rare for a child to have been chucked a load of abuse, that whether it be online or face to face, and them to have not done or said something that they really don't want you to see back. So they might have told them to go and get lost in not those terms, and so they'll be too scared to share that with you. And because it's online, they're going to have evidence of that. So it's kind of trying to stay as calm as possible, and explaining, working out together what you're going to do next. But your school safeguarding procedures should be, at the forefront of your mind, as I'm sure it always is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Charlotte and I have discussed in the past, when it comes to reporting safeguarding incidents, it's actually quite important to make the child feel like their concern is being listened to, and you are taking action quickly. But yeah, I mean, being understanding and being calm in your reaction, really important as well. So Charlotte, if I come to you, what can we do to prevent harmful incidents from occurring online? What kind of policies can we have in place, and what kind of education is around that?
To coin a famous phrase, education, 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 it's really important that children are educated in an age-appropriate way to help them both recognise what abuse looks like online, what bullying looks like online, and also how to support their mates and their friends, how to offer that kind of, to not be the bystander, to actively get involved, and to be the person who might stand up and say, don't do that to so-and-so, it's really not very nice. So I think it's really important that we teach children in an age-appropriate way, and that we do start quite early on talking about what their, what kind of friendships they have, what healthy relationships look like, and we transpose that into the online environment, because we used to, many years ago, talk about the sort of difference between online and offline, and we used to talk about stranger danger in the online context. Well, all of that has completely merged together now. Kids play games with each other online, they feel like they know them, they support one another, they disclose things to one another, they might never have met them face to face. And I think as adults, we probably couldn't relate to that. But during COVID, I mean, I only met you face to face, Lulu, for the first time not that long ago. And we've been talking online for, nearly 2 years. So I think we can all recognise now that you do form close relationships with people, even though you might not meet them face to face. So I think the education piece is really important. I think having really clear policies, both internally for your staff and your school, is really important, but also translating that policies into something that children can understand, so that they know the boundaries, they know the sanctions if they break the boundaries and they break the rules, and then following through with things. So making sure that reports are responded to, making sure that children are listened to. So many times children tell us, well, I did report it, but nothing happened. Well, guess what? When that happens, you don't do it again, because you just think that you're ignored, and you think, what's the point in... We saw that with the Ofsted sexual abuse report, that actually children had reported low-level sexual abuse, harassment, but they'd been ignored. So they stopped talking about it. They stopped reporting it. Ofcom recently, in the last week, are actively encouraging children to report incidents of harmful content that they've seen or viewed online. So it's really important that we encourage them to report and respond, but it's also really important that we make sure that we respond as adults and professionals as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it looked like Caroline was having a bit of tech issues, but she's jumped back on now. So thanks for joining us again, Caroline.
So sorry.
No,
I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. So yeah, I mean, you've brought up the term age appropriate. I mean, what do you mean by that? So when it comes to sort of primary school, secondary school, how do you see age appropriate education for online learning and online relationships and being on kind online? What kind of things? I'm going to start with you, Charlotte, and then Caroline, I'm going to ask you to comment on that.
I think it's very much rooted in where children are in terms of their level of maturity in relation to their kind of brain development. So when children are in primary school, their world is quite insular. They probably do know most of their friends face to face. They're supported by their parents. And then once they start to go into secondary school, that kind of social sphere grows, and they become more reliant on other people who outside of the kind of family unit. So I think age appropriate talking to children, and teachers will know better than me how to do this in the context of a kind of primary and a secondary school. But I think it's very important to talk about healthy friendships, healthy relationships, and what are the sorts of things that you could do as an 8-year-old or as a 15-year-old to support your mate online, whoever that is, whether you know them personally, whether you don't know them, whether you know them face to face or you just know them online. I think we need to start kind of boiling it down to very basic things, so that children understand what to do and how to be kinder to each other online, and to ask permission for sharing. It's some of those basic things that we want to educate children in doing. And I think parents have quite a huge role to play as well, because we ask more of children than we do of adults in some ways. We ask children to do things like, ask that person if you can share that photograph before you share it. But parents often don't even ask their children, do you mind if I share that picture of you online, before they actually share it. So parents have a role in kind of modelling some of that behaviour as well.
Yeah, really interesting. Caroline, if I can come to you, what is your sort of take on age-appropriate education of online learning, online relationships, and, like we've mentioned previously, just being a good digital citizen?
Sure. I'm sorry, I can't turn my camera on. I am struggling with the tech issues here. I think what's really key is that, I think that what's really key is that we remember, for young children, certainly in the primary age range, that the internet and being online is it's a very abstract space. And when things are abstract for young children, it makes it extremely difficult for them to perceive potential risk, because when they are navigating around an online space, what they see is what they get. And I think that obviously leaves children open to greater online vulnerability. But I think what's important is that we make the internet a tangible space for children, so that they can perceive the potential risk. And I think that having important dialogues, which I know, Charlotte, you've just touched on, and apologies if I repeat anything that you've already said in my brief absence, but I think what's really key is that we use face-to-face scenarios with young children and then project those scenarios into an online space, so that they can then, through a scenario-based learning approach, understand what would be the right and not so great choices to make when you're in an online world. So I think age appropriately, what primary school teachers are so good at and so often, you know, don't get the recognition for, is that they are working tirelessly to manage behavior. And I think really developing digital citizenship skills is really an extension of that classroom behavioral management. But we need to just create that link, that bridge for teachers to say, whatever you do to promote good behavior face to face, please, you know, let's give them the tools so that they can extend that into a digital space, because our children are spending such a huge amount of their life played out in a digital landscape. And if we, you know, absolutely, you know, train children as we do face to face, you know, say, please, say thank you, open the door, let somebody walk through, make eye contact, all of those things is creating those boundaries and expectations. And if teachers were able to focus really, you know, much more explicitly on those soft skills, and also parents feel and understand the value of talking about online behavior, actually, I just think we would mitigate so many risks, certainly in terms of online vulnerability, further down the line.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think of, like using scenarios in actual learning about online environments, and to put your students in sort of the decision position, and giving them sort of that power to make up their mind which is the best route for them. That's a really interesting idea. So I feel like we can't talk about digital citizenship without bringing up social media. So one of our findings was over 60% of teachers found an increase in the use of social media as a form of bullying, with close to 50% of teachers actually being the target of inappropriate use of internet connected devices through social media. So Charlotte, if I come to you with this huge question, is social media all bad?
I think you know what I'm going to say to this.
I do.
You know, the short answer is absolutely not. But, and with a rider and a but, I do think that effective management and strategies from either parents and or schools and teachers is absolutely crucial, because you can get drawn into, you know, looking at TikTok videos or scrolling through Instagram as an adult for long periods of time, and you think, hang on a minute, where's half the day gone? I've been looking at Instagram for far too long.
Yeah.
And I do think it skews reality, and I do think it has definitely an impact on children and young people in terms of the level of influence it has, how they feel about their lives, how they feel about their bodies, how they feel about, you know, achieving what they're achieving, whatever that looks like. I do think it has an impact. And I think as adults, we have to help children to kind of mitigate the impact of spending hours and hours a day scrolling through social media. And I think, like everything in life, it's a little bit like balance, you know, and if you talk to most parents, they do allow their children online, either gaming, or they do allow them to have TikTok. But what they also want to balance that out with is them, you know, being out playing sports, or being out climbing a tree, or doing some kind of physical outdoor activity, or doing things with the family, because I think it's very important for their cognitive development. And I also think, again, through the pandemic, you kind of lose a little bit of grip on the real world and reality, and kind of socializing outside of being online. So I think it is up to us as adults to sometimes act in the best interest of children, well, always act in the best interest of children, but be their kind of conscience and be the person that says, actually, you've had enough now for today, you need to come off that, because it builds good habits for the future. Because once they reach a certain age, it's a bit like food, isn't it? You know, you try and make sure your kids eat well so that when they're older they continue that, rather than not continuing that. And it's the same kind of principle, I think. Yeah,
no, that's really interesting, thank you. And Martha, so there's a big topic around online bullying and offline bullying, but what are some of the links between face-to-face and online bullying?
Yeah, thanks. It's often a thing that surprises people, but there's actually really strong links between online and offline bullying. And actually, offline bullying is still the most frequent type of bullying that takes place. So Warwick University in 2017 did some research into the types of bullying and how it takes place. And what it found was that it's actually quite rare for a child to be bullied online alone without it happening face to face. It was something like 80% of cases was started face to face, and then it tends to go online. So it's so when children aren't seeing each other face to face, actually the online bullying is much less likely to happen. So we have to see bullying face to face and online bullying is intrinsically interlinked. Children don't see a distinction between the bullying that they face in school and the ones that this type that they face online. What it is like an extra tool in the toolbox. And there are some things that that make online bullying pervasive and difficult to deal with. And one of that is the fact that it's 24/7, and people talk about that impact of the fact that you can't get away from people because they can just constantly come into your bedroom, and you know they're constantly there. The fact that you can share content can re-emphasize the trauma of bullying incidents. So if you get hit whilst on the way to the school toilet block, that's something that's really difficult for you and the people around you, but once it's finished, it's finished. Whereas if you're online, that video could be shared and shared again and then shared again, and so it can feel very isolating, and it's difficult to take down sometimes. The other thing is that what we tend to find is that children sometimes find it quite a lot easier to be unkind online because they can't see your reaction, which can be quite protective for victims, because they can't, you know, they don't have the humiliation of seeing them cry or doing things like that. But it's actually really difficult to empathize through that degree of separation. And then as a positive, what children talk to us about is that they will have been called that name for ages, and they'll have been telling people that that's what's happening, and it's not until they finally send that text message that you've got evidence. So there is that it presents that evidence as well. But we do see that you can't have a sort of separate anti-bullying policy about face-to-face bullying and then have that separate to your online safety type approach. It has to all be interlinked.
Yeah, thank you. And so when it comes to schools and teachers and students preventing the use of social media in this way, what do you suggest that they do?
Well, the biggest thing is about teaching about online safety, and as Charlotte said, education is definitely the key. So really talking about what good healthy relationships look like. What does that look like? And if you can do that in ways that engages them and looks at the current things that are going on in their lives, then do that. But having that conversation about what does a good friend look like online, what does abuse look like online, how can you consent online, making sure that they know where to go to for help. So it was a good 3 or 4 years ago, we did a campaign with the Royal Foundation and Prince William, where we did this campaign called Stop Speak Support, and it was looking at bystanders involvement. And the Stop Speak Support message was stop and think about what you're saying. So don't get involved, don't think about the impact of your actions. Speak to an adult that you trust, or speak to somewhere, and giving people tools to find places that they can go to get support. And then the third thing was about reaching that support. And there's loads of resources that we've built around that. They're all just free on our website if you search for Stop Speak Support. But for children knowing what good relationships look like, how they can report things that when they go wrong, and how they should be treating each other is really important. We've got loads of free online training on our website as well that anybody can take part into.
Definitely. I mean, they sound like very good resources that I think would be good to shout about a bit more. So yeah, that's brilliant. And Charlotte, do you have anything to add on to that?
I guess the only thing I would add, I think the education side is really important, but I also think that the issue around preventing this kind of behaviour on social media, children need to be clear about what's acceptable and what's not, and some of those sanctions reinforced, because again, if they can consistently see, for example, some children getting away with it, then they'll think it's okay. So I think from a school's perspective, the teaching element is the most important bit, but the other bit that goes alongside that is the kind of policies and procedures and the reinforcing of any kind of sanctions in relation to that, so that you can effectively model the behaviour.
Thank you. So Caroline, if I can come to you with a question, what support is available for schools dealing with issues of online safety and student behaviour when it comes to the online world?
I mean, I think it's quite a crowded marketplace in many senses around what's available online. I mean, there's some brilliant sites out there, obviously, and so many of them are free. UK Safer Internet Centre, Common Sense Media, Internet Matters, Childline, CEOP. I think what can sometimes happen is that when there's a huge kind of library of information, I think when we speak to teachers, they talk about feeling overloaded with information and really not knowing where to start or how to prioritize or what's right for their year group or what's right for their school and where do we begin. And I think it's, you know, I think, you know, a couple of people have mentioned this as well, taking children based on their experiences and taking the learning from that place, you know, whether they've been on Roblox, whether it's been a Minecraft incident or whether, you know, something really positive has happened. It's just about having frequent, relevant dialogue that resonates really with how they are interacting with technology already. And I do think that in reality, the connection between us as trusted adults and everybody taking responsibility for children's safety online, the connection between those trusted adults and the children in our care is really of paramount importance. And you know, the online world is evolving so quickly. Things change, privacy settings change, and new games come out, and that's very difficult for people to stay abreast of. But I think if we really are having those conversations with children, that really makes them, you know, that engages them at their level based on their experiences, and they understand this, you know, not such an abstract space, but actually as a tangible, reachable, accessible space. And there's that hand-in-hand journey with a trusted adult. I think nothing's more supportive than that relationship with a teacher who is just talking about behavior and feelings and the emotion and the human side of our living with technology and living through technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So if we move on to our final question, another sort of stat that we found was that over 70% of teachers believed that their school needed to improve on issues like teacher safety and well-being, and 12% of teachers who had considered leaving the profession had done so because of an increased concern for student well-being. So I guess the question, I'll go to all of you, but if I could start with you, Caroline, since you're unmuted. What can schools do to protect the safety of their teachers and improve student well-being?
Oh, that's a massive question.
It is, I'm afraid.
I mean, I think the filtering and the technical management, of which I'm not an expert, has to be in place, ready for, certainly, you know, at school level. But I think, I mean, I know I'm probably going to repeat myself here, but I think, you know, classroom management, behavior management, I don't think we can look at these without including our relationship through the digital, in the digital space as well. And I see it all as an extension of, like Martha was saying around, can you really have cyberbullying without face-to-face bullying, and vice versa? I think behavior management and student well-being, it's all part of their world now, because that's how our children are living, this very blended environment. So I think if our schools had more space and time to talk about the importance of human connection and the relationship that teachers can have with students in order to understand their world and understand their triggers and understand the things that create stress and anxiety, and we had more of an emphasis on personal social development in schools and in the education system, and more of a focus on accepting and understanding our children as they present themselves, I think that this has to feed into a healthier online world, just as in the same way that there's so much talk around wellness and what we can do to create 5 ways to wellness, and I think that just extending that into the digital landscape has just got to be all wrapped up together, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Answering a big question, sorry.
It is a big question, but hopefully between the 3 of you we can get somewhere on it. So Martha, if I can come to you, what can schools do to protect the safety of their teachers and improve student wellbeing?
Yeah, I think it goes back to boundary setting, as we talked about before, and really getting people and vitally parents' engagement in it, because we know it can completely fall apart if the parents' rules are not the same as your school rules. Yeah. And so setting those boundaries and coming up together with young people about the boundaries that you think should be in place around tech, and giving them those skills to think really critically about their behaviour online. So we spent quite a lot of time, we took some children to Instagram to talk about how we can get them, ironically, to talk about how we can get them to do less online. And in the break, they came running up to me and they were like, Martha, we've got this great idea about how we can do less online. We're always on our phone at bedtime. So what we think is we can, they were like, the alarm in your phone, just give us, Instagram can give us all a phone that just the alarm, it's only the alarm bit, and that's it. So we can leave our phone downstairs and we can take this thing upstairs that's just the alarm. And I said, do you mean an alarm clock? And they genuinely didn't know that an alarm clock existed until then. It was quite nice because I sort of shocked them. I told them about Teasmade and their minds were blown. But really talking to them, they want to talk about how sometimes they feel overwhelmed with the amount of time that they're looking at TikTok, and they don't really know how to kind of step away from it. So having that open conversation with them about, well, how do we do it? How do we set these boundaries? You can't have your phone all day. You can't take your phone into the changing rooms at PE time. That's not something we can do. So what are we going to do to come up with this together? Writing a contract. Some schools use like a traffic light system, so that because it depends on what type of class you're having each day, where you have like a green if you can have your phones out because we're going to need them. Red if you're absolutely not, and then amber if it's kind of a mixture of both. There's loads of different ways that you can do it, but having that conversation together with young people and parents is really important.
No, definitely. And it's funny that you mentioned that the Instagram, setting time limits for Instagram, and Charlotte mentioned earlier that it's hard for adults to do, let alone students and young people.
Yeah,
it's you just end up in an Instagram hole. So I've actually recently put a time limit on my usage of Instagram and Facebook, because you just lose time. Definitely those are really, really useful things to do. And Charlotte, if I come to you with the same question, do you have anything to add?
No, I think really what Martha and Caroline have mentioned is really important. I do think the tech could be used really, really well to help predict, inform what kind of trends that schools are seeing in relation to well-being. So I think there is definitely a role to play there, without obviously affecting people's privacy too much, which I think is always a difficult balancing act in this particular area. I think schools have been heroic, if I'm honest, in the last few years about helping to safeguard children when they are at home learning. And I've said this a number of times, I've heard some fantastic teachers who are kind of going around to kids' houses and peering over the fence to make sure that they're okay, because they're so worried about them being at home all the time. So I think that schools are always concerned about the well-being of their students, and I think what's happened in the last few years is the kind of infrastructure around schools is kind of dissipating quite a lot. So schools are having to do quite a lot more than they would have had to have done, because the referral pathways don't exist in the same way. You know, we're not able to get children therapeutic intervention support in the way that we would like to. So I think schools have a mountain to climb in relation to that, and I think it's very challenging, because every teacher knows that you can't teach a child who doesn't feel safe. So it's the kind of first principle of all of schools and all of teaching, really. So I guess, again, that statistic is slightly surprising, because I would imagine that lots of teachers are quite frustrated, upset and affected by the amount of students that they see who aren't okay and aren't able to necessarily access the support they need. But I do think schools play a pivotal role, a core role in communities, in keeping children safe. I think what we do have to do, though, is we have to do better at looking after our teachers. I think, you know, they have been quite neglected, and I think we do have to make sure that their well-being is also at the front and centre of school and the culture of school as well. I think that's really important.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that does actually bring us to our final question. So all our questions are done now. And in the meantime, if anybody has a question in the last sort of 6 minutes of this hour, please pop it in the chat box and I can ask our experts. But I'm also just going to share something on my screen. If anybody would be interested in receiving a demo of Impero Classroom, or just talking to one of our experts about classroom management, online safety, student wellbeing, yeah, just feel free to scan this code and it should take you through to a form that you just fill in, and one of the experts will be in touch with you. I've not got any questions in the chat box just yet.